First of all, to kick off Week 5 of the NFL season, we had a great game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. I think NFC South games are always fun because those teams seem to really a lot of times be on par with each other. Like I think both the Falcons and the Bucs have real good playoff chances this year. Not just playoff chances, but chances to go deep in the playoffs. And so in other times, it might be no team has a winning record. So they're just always on par with each other for the most part. And obviously there's a divide between these two teams and say the Panthers. But in general, NFC South games are really fun. And overall, the NFL has been really fun to start off the year. But as for Thursday Night Football, not really so much. In the past couple weeks, and even before this in previous years, there's kind of a criticism that, the prime games are not what they should be. And there's an argument to be made that, you're going to have bad teams on primetime games sometime because it wouldn't be fair to, Philadelphia or the Chiefs or someone else to always be playing, the Thursday night games and then the Monday night games. All the big market teams taking up all that, that's going to be negative. That's going to be bad for their team in terms of having to play primetime games every single week and just not being able to be on a schedule because really your body has to be on a rhythm, especially in a game as physical as football, to kind of be in the right mindset and perform well each and every week and prevent injuries. So I understand, why the primetime games aren't always the best, but especially on Amazon Prime Video, it seems like we hadn't always had the best matchups. Last week was Cowboys versus Giants, and the Cowboys can be good, but the Giants aren't going anywhere, so that one's kind of a predictable matchup just in recent memory. And during that game, they advertised the next week's, and I looked at it and I said, hey, that's going to be a pretty good game between the Buccaneers and Falcons, and it absolutely was. Not only did we get 4 quarters of exciting football, we got an extra one. We got an overtime period, and the Falcons went in overtime 36-30. So a high-scoring game. Maybe the defensive-minded individuals watching the game weren't huge fans, but in general, I think it was a very exciting game and really a showing of what both these teams are capable of. There's a lot of talent on these rosters. The Falcons, they brought in Kirk Cousins expecting him to use his weapons, and he did this game. Drake London went off. Kyle Pitts had a solid game. Darnell Mooney was really, really good for them. And Bijan didn't have the best game, but they aligned the stars for the most part. The Falcons did. And for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield is having a great season. And, speaking of Kirk Cousins, he just had 500 yards. He broke Matt Ryan's record for Falcons passing yards in a game. But then on the Bucs end, Baker Mayfield's reviving his career in Tampa, and it's great to see. And, they've got one of the best wide receiver duos in the league and one of the most consistent wide receivers that we've ever seen in Mike Evans and his running mate, Chris Godwin. Plus, Bucky Irving has shown flashes. Rachaad had a pretty solid game. He had a really good run at one point, and he has potential as a good receiving back. He just hasn't been able to work it all out. And the coaches too, in general, the Falcons have a new head coach, and the Bucs, Todd Bowles, was kind of being criticized for his conservative play style. You can still make arguments for that, but the coaches have something to prove. So all around, this was a very fun and interesting game. Before I delve into some individual player profiles, I really want to talk about a guy like Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, Drake London, and a couple others. I want to talk about the teams first, and let's begin with the winners of this game, the Atlanta Falcons. After this game, both teams are 3-2, and they're tied for top of their division. The Buccaneers came in 3-1, and the Falcons came in 2-2, and now it's 3-2 for both of them. And for the Atlanta Falcons, this has been a season that kind of got off to a slow start for the first couple weeks, especially week 1. Kirk Cousins didn't look all that great, and there were kind of concerns that he came back too early from his injury because an ACL takes a long, long time to recover. And so especially with the way that the Falcons played, Kirk Cousins worked best for the Vikings when he was running the play action and plays like that where there's motion involved with the quarterback himself as opposed to, shotgun formation, which the Falcons ran a lot of. So the discussions around that were, hey, are they just doing this to protect Kirk Cousins, make him not have to move around a lot, and is that going to negatively impact the team and his play? And for the Falcons, they didn't get off to the best start, but now we're really seeing what they can do because the Buccaneers are a very good team, and they came out with the win. Now, Cousins hasn't had the best playoff history, But in general, I think that the sky is the limit for this team because of the weapons you have around him. This roster is very well set up. Outside of the stars and Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London, you've got some other nice offensive weapons as well. Ray McLeod has looked really impressive in terms of the expectation as opposed to the actual performance. And Darnell Mooney had a really, really good game this past Thursday. So there's a lot of positives on this team, and their defense is really solid as well, led by guys like Jesse Bates. So in general, I think this Falcons team, the sky is the limit, and it really comes down to how Kirk Cousins performs in the playoffs. And if Kirk ever got hurt, I think they would be fine with Michael Penix because this is a guy who spent quite a bit of time in college, so he has knowledge of the game already, and being able to sit behind Kirk a little bit and learn from him, I think if Penix had to come in, he would at minimum be serviceable. So I think the Falcons are going to be really, really good. I think it's the same thing for the Bucs. I think that they are going to be really, really good this year as well. And it's weird to say this about not one, but two NFC South teams because in general, this division has not been very good. Tom Brady's last year in Tampa Bay, they made the playoffs with a losing record. And ever since, Drew Brees retired and then Tom Brady was there for the last couple of years, the division hadn't been very good aside from maybe one team. And there had been teams like the Falcons that might be hovering around 7-10, but they're still just missing a piece. But now the NFC South has at least two very, very good teams in it, and the Buccaneers and Falcons. So for the Buccaneers, this is yet again another very, very talented roster. They have one of the best wide receiver duos in the entire league, and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And Mike Evans specifically is a top wide receiver in this league. I believe that wholeheartedly. You can harp on him all you want and say maybe 1,000 yards record, most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons to start a career in NFL history. You can say, oh, that's stat pattern because, 1 year maybe he had 1,006 yards, for example, right? But Mike Evans has been the model of consistency. And when he's on, he's very hard to stop. He's so tall, he's got a huge catching range, so he can be a quarterback's best friend. And I think Baker's absolutely benefited from having him and Chris Godwin to throw the ball to. Even Cade Otton, a tight end, is a very serviceable tight end. And for the run game, they've got potential, even if that's not fully realized. Bucky Irving has shown some really good flashes for this team, and Rachaad White is a good receiving back. He's not always the best at running. He had one really big run this past game, and aside from that, it was really slow. But in general, the stat line looked good just because of that big run. However, generally, he hasn't been the best runner. Before this game, he was averaging under 3 yards a carry. And that's not good at all. But what he brings to the receiving game, you can run two running backs in a formation and have it work out. You can have Rachaad White out there to receive the ball and Bucky Irving out there to actually be the rusher. And they did a little trick play this game, and I called it out before the play that it was going to be some kind of trick play. I called it beforehand because they had both running backs out there. They had Bucky Irving lined up like he was going to be a receiver, and they had Rachaad White out there like he was going to be the rusher. And I called it that there was going to be some trickery on this play, and that's exactly what happened. So just having two running backs with two different skill sets, it opens up a lot of opportunities to adjust the expectations of the other team and the defense. They might not really know what to expect. If they scout well, they can maybe figure it out. Like, I called the trick play beforehand. But in general, I think it just opens up a lot of avenues for plays like that to kind of subvert the expectations of the defense. And it really just sets you up for success. And Todd Bowles is a very conservative coach. But having offensive plays like that, it really shows the potential that he has as an offensive player caller at times. And their defense, it didn't look good this game at all. They allowed 36 points. But generally, they have a pretty solid defense. They've been missing Antoine Winfield for sure. His absence is noticeable. But when he comes back, I think this pass defense is going to be a lot better. And number zero has been really solid for him. And so for Tampa, I think the sky's the limit for them as well. Baker has shown in the past that he can win in the playoffs and he can put up stats in the playoffs. So I think I would trust the Buccaneers in a playoff environment more than the Falcons, but I really trust them both. And I think the sky's the limit. Speaking of Baker, he's one of the players I want to mention specifically. He's had a great year so far. Week 2 and week 3 were kind of average, but week 1 was amazing. and weeks 4 and 5 have been very, very good as well. The Browns undoubtedly made a mistake moving off this man a couple of years ago. And even that's kind of beating a dead horse at this point because we all know that the Deshaun Watson situation hasn't worked out well at all. And with Joe Flacco scoring a touchdown this week for the Colts, I mean, the Browns have had two better quarterbacks than Deshaun Watson performance-wise, and they moved off of both of them. But for Baker, even after the Browns kind of threw him to the wayside, he went to the Panthers, and he wasn't very good there. He was competing with Sam Darnold, he was having a good year now, but at the time, Sam Darnold was generally considered a bust, and Baker was struggling to even hold that starting job for the Panthers. And then he went to the Rams. He had that game-winning drive with 2 minutes left on Thursday Night Football, where he didn't even know the playbook that well. He just came in a couple of days before, and he had a really solid end to the year with the Rams while Stafford was hurt. But then after that, no one really wanted him, and he reached out to Tampa, who was just kind of looking to rebuild, and he was going to lead ship there, no pun intended. And he went over there, had a great first year, led them to the playoffs. They beat the Eagles in the first round. And then this year, he's been even better. He's continued his trajectory of being a very, very good quarterback, if not more, if he's not doing more this year. Now, Baker isn't the most physically gifted quarterback in the NFL, not by a long shot, but what he does have is confidence. And that confidence fuels him in a way that it does to very few quarterbacks in this league. He fully believes that he can make any throw and that he has what it takes to be a top-tier quarterback in this league. And at times, that may be a detriment. He might throw a bad pick. But in general, that is perfect for this Buccaneers team because they have guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin that can and will go deep. And you can, especially Mike Evans, you can target him in the end zone for sure. You can take those tough throws in the end zone, and Mike's so tall and has the biggest catch radius. So you're able to make tough throws to Mike, give him those 50-50 balls, and give him and Chris Godwin the ball deep, and it works out. So Baker Mayfield is perfect for this Buccaneers offense, and he's really, really revived his career, and it's great to see. I'm a Sooners fan. I plan on going there in a couple of years, and I'd love the chance to eventually interview Baker Mayfield. Are we ever going to see that happen? I can't guarantee it. But, I want to go in sports broadcasting, and Baker Mayfield is great. And, he's a Sooners legend, and he means so much to the people around Norman. But generally, the NFL, there had been discussions about how, he won a Heisman. He was great in college, but what has he done in the NFL? But over the past couple of years, he's really proved he's found all that out. He's just kind of focused on his game, hasn't been in all the progressive commercials, and he's been really, really good for the Buccaneers, really revived his career, and has proven himself to be one of the top quarterbacks in the league. I truly believe that. I think Baker Mayfield is really up there. Let's talk about the man Baker's throwing the ball to, Mike Evans. Ever since he has come into the league, he has not failed to reach 1,000 yards. He has the record for most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons to start a career, and it's no coincidence. Mike Evans has been consistently a top 15 wide receiver, I would say. He's never been number one. He's never really been top 5 even. But his consistency has been great for this Tampa franchise because this is a team that hasn't really had historical success for the most part. They've won 2 Super Bowls, but in spite of that, they have one of the lowest winning percentages in NFL history as a franchise. So to have a guy like Mike Evans on your team, even if he's not the best wide receiver in the league, to have him be so consistent for so long and be a steady, guaranteed 1,000-yard wide receiver, having Mike Evans is so great for that franchise. And for this team right now, he's making a huge impact. Like I said earlier, Baker is a very, very confident quarterback. So he's going to want someone he can throw those 50-50 balls to. And Mike Evans is perfect for that. What's he, 6'4", 6'5"? And, he hasn't dealt with too many injuries either, despite having not the biggest frame. He's tall, but he doesn't have the biggest frame in terms of weight on him. He's really stayed healthy, and I think that's another huge thing when you talk about his 1,000-yard mark, is that to do that, you've got to be really healthy, and he has. He's been injured before, and he, what he does when he comes back? He might have a 200-yard receiving game. He's just that kind of wide receiver. So you might be without Mike for a few weeks, but he comes back, he's going to be instant offense. And he is just so great. His chemistry with Baker is unreal. And Mike Evans is a Buccaneers legend, and I think he's going to go down as an all-time great wide receiver, no doubt. His catch radius is huge. He doesn't drop too many balls. He's great in the red zone. Mike Evans is a top wide receiver in this league. And, you can make arguments, he's no Tyreek Hill, he's no Justin Jefferson. But for what he's done for his team, his impact on the franchise is just as big as any of those guys. And what he does with his quarterback, right? Him and his QB have amazing, amazing chemistry. And just the physical abilities and capabilities of this man. Mike Evans is an all-time great wide receiver, and he will go down in the history books. Number 13 will be retired for Tampa, and he will undoubtedly be a Hall of Famer one day. And he already has a resume. Like, if he retired today, his receiving yards are up there all time. Is he going to be number one? No. But he's already up there. He's got comparable stats with some Hall of Fame wide receivers, and he's still got some years left on him. Mike Evans is an all-time great for the Buccaneers. Is Rachaad White. And while everything's been optimistic for my discussions with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, I unfortunately can't say the same about Rachaad White. This is a guy who, coming into the season, I thought was going to be really, really solid for them. He was a great pass catcher last year, and his biggest issue has just been running the ball. And as a running back, that's not really acceptable, and you're not really going to last long term if you can't run the ball. And that kind of goes without saying. But for Rachaad, he's been in the league a couple years now, and he's been a very, very good receiving back. But you can't even make the argument that he's been dual threat because his Buccaneers offense has had the worst rushing offense in the league for the past couple of years, according to both yards per attempt and actual yardage. So for Rachaad, he's getting some attempts, but he's not doing much with it. And this past game, he only had 10 carries, and he had 72 yards, which looks pretty solid on paper. But one of those carries was like for 50 yards. So if you take out that play, he really didn't contribute to much in the rushing game. And it's really sad to see from Rachaad because, once again, this is a guy I was pretty high on. But I don't know what the long-term future for him is in Tampa, especially because Bucky Irving has shown some flashes. And this O-line, it hasn't been the best at run blocking, but Bucky Irving has done more with that O-line than Rachaad White has in 3 years. And this is Bucky's rookie year. So for Rachaad, I don't know that he has a long-term future in Tampa. And it's really a shame to see because this is a guy that has a lot of potential if he can put it all together as a dual threat. But right now he's one-dimensional, and when you put him out there, it's kind of a sign that the Buccaneers are more than likely going to pass that ball because that's where Rachaad's best at. And so I think you can run two running backs with him and Bucky, kind of make some trick plays, have Bucky in the backfield, and have Rachaad a receiver. I think that can work well sometimes. And then maybe, run a trick play like they did this past game where you've got Rachaad lined up at the running back and Bucky as wide receiver. And then you swap it out in the motion before the ball is snapped. So it works out sometimes, but in general, there's not much of a spot for Rachaad White on this team. And it's just really a shame to see. He's got a ton of talent, a ton of heart, I believe, but he has to be some Falcons players. Let's start off by talking about the QB, Kirk Cousins. He was flag surfing after the game with the Atlanta Falcons fans. And it was just great to see because this is a guy that has went through so much adversity. He tore his ACL last year. And, through everything, he has been able to bounce back and be a really good quarterback. There was a reputation that, primetime Kirk isn't good. He can't win the primetime games. And at the start of his career, that was pretty true. He really didn't show up when the right lights were on. But over the past couple of years, he's been a lot better in those games. And I don't think it's fair to judge Kirk Cousins by who he was, 7-10 years ago compared to where he is now because he's a completely different quarterback. And just being in the game for so long, he's really learned the intricacies of the sport and has become a very, very good quarterback. As I said earlier, he broke the Falcons' record for passing yards in a game on Matt Ryan night, no less. Matt Ryan had 503 one time, and Kirk Cousins this past game had 509 and 4 passing touchdowns. And the thing about Kirk that I really want to focus on here is, yes, obviously he's had great wide receivers like Justin Jefferson, and Drake London's not on that level yet, but Drake London as well. He's had really talented receivers around him, but he also is very good at utilizing a lot of different players. For example, Darnell Mooney had a really good game this past week against the Bucs, and not only did he have a really good game, his production was just about on par with Drake London. But it's not just Drake London and Darnell Mooney and Kyle Pitts. He's not just using the big three either. He consistently gets the ball out to other guys too, like Ray McLeod, and just utilizes a lot of Falcons players in the offense. And I think that's really cool to see because this is a team that, yes, it's led by guys on offense in terms of their skill players. The main guys are Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. But to be able to utilize other guys, you've got other players on this team too that are very young and have a lot of potential, like Darnell Mooney. He's still pretty young. Like Ray McLeod, who's having a breakout year in terms of his expectations versus his actual performance. And Tyler Algier has been a very good running back as well. So, in general, you've got a lot of pieces on this Falcons offense, and Kirk Cousins is able to distribute the ball to all of them. And maybe it's not always even, because obviously you're going to want to throw to your number one wide receiver more often than not. But Kirk Cousins does a really good job at spreading the ball around, and I think that's great for the Falcons and just what they need, really. Because the argument, was we need a guy that can use our stars like London, like Pitts, like B-Rob. But you also, if you just throw to those guys, your offense becomes very predictable, and teams can just cover those guys. But Kirk Cousins is able to not just utilize those guys well, he's able to maximize the talent of everybody else on this Falcons roster too. So Kirk Cousins has been great as an Atlanta Falcon, despite, the slow start in week one. The last Kirk Cousins that I want to talk about for the Falcons today is Drake London, because this is a wide receiver that I have been very, very high on. I've drafted him in fantasy the past 2 or 3 years. Definitely 2. I think probably 3. And he had a really good rookie year, about 900 yards. And then his sophomore year, I think the general consensus was that he was going to take a big leap because Desmond Ridder was – and this is really funny in hindsight because Ridder, ultimately, it didn't work out there in Atlanta at all. But in hindsight, it is funny. However, at the time, when Desmond Ridder had come in originally for the Falcons over the last final games of Drake London's rookie year, him and London had a really good connection. London was averaging about 72 yards a game when Desmond Ridder was throwing him the ball. And so going into London's sophomore year, I think a lot of people thought, I know I did, that Desmond Ridder was going to be able to deliver London this ball pretty consistently, and he was going to no doubt be at least 1,000-yard wide receiver, if not, 1,200-yard wide receiver. And that didn't happen. Drake London, in terms of his stats in production, he was pretty stagnant in general. And really, if you looked at it from the lens of this was his second year, it looked like he kind of had regressed because he was doing the same stuff, and I believe he had less receptions than he did his previous year. So it kind of looked like he regressed, or at the very least plateaued. But now Kirk Cousins comes in, and he's finally got a real quarterback, and Drake London has shown what he really can do. This is another guy like Mike Evans, who's just a big-bodied wide receiver, really tall, so he can make those 50-50 catches. And my best comparison for him is Michael Thomas. And Michael Thomas catches a lot of flack now. Even when he was at the top of his game, Michael Thomas got a lot of flack for being a slant boy, right? But now it's kind of just been because he's injured. But moving back to the Michael Thomas comparison, I think that's because Drake London is really good at cutting inside the middle and just using his length to catch the ball and rack up the receptions, because he had a lot of receptions this game too, along with yards, but a lot of receptions this game. So London can catch a lot of targets, and he hasn't dealt with injuries too badly. So he's durable as well, and that's a very good combination. And I think Drake London has potential to be a very good and one of the top wide receivers in this league. Do I think he's going to be that this year? No. This is only his first year with Kirk. I think it's going to take a little bit longer to really, really gel. But this past game against the Buccaneers, he had, I believe, 154 yards. London was great, and I think it's just a sign of things to come that he's going to be a top wide receiver in this league in a couple of years. I have no doubt about that. And I will die on that hill. If Drake London is not a top 10 to 5 range wide receiver in 2 years from now, so I will be very, there's just very a lot surprised. Of takeaways for both these teams. They had a really fun game on Thursday Night Football, and whether it's talking about the players of the teams as a whole, I think both of them have very, very bright futures, whether it's this season or beyond, whether that's the next couple years, because we don't know how long Kirk's going to stay around, or, for the next decade, hopefully, assuming that Baker Mayfield can last that long in terms of longevity, especially with quarterback now. They're able to last quite a bit longer. Guys like Tom Brady went to 45, Aaron Rodgers. So in general, just a lot to take away from this game. It was really fun to break down. And this is by far the longest I've spent talking about just a single NFL game. I'd love to do that more for the primetime games, for sure.